the Quran illustrates this very well. The Quran now is the Ḥafṣ-ʿan-ʿāṣim qirāʻāt. That's just the default Quran now. That was never the case in previous history. There was just different qirāʻāt. Now most Muslims have never even heard of the qirāʻāt, and it comes as a big shock. That's just because of technology. Because Egypt, first of all, obviously the Ottoman Empire adopted it, but still that Ottoman Empire had a pretty limited reach, right? But then, okay, it was popular in one area, Ottoman Empire, right? But not in most other areas. But then modern technology comes along, and what's the dominant Arabic, cultural, economic and cultural sort of power? It's Egypt by a light year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Massive population, much more developed infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. So Egypt, and because of the Ottoman thing, Egypt's dominant qirā'a is the Hafs one, right? And so then Egypt, they develop, cassette tapes or whatever, and nice sort of printed books. And so those just spread everywhere else, right? It's just sort of like American movies are everywhere. Everyone watches American movies. It just happens because it's the dominant power. It's got a gigantic economy. It has much greater ability to just project its media everywhere and for its media to spread everywhere, right? So it's just, and so just through the modern technology of recording and so on, having like a fixed permanent version that you can listen to and re-listen to, like a cassette tape, for example, or a fixed printed text, for example, the effect of that is just that one version becomes universalized and becomes the norm. There's something about it. This happens on a broader level just with modern infrastructure, like modern nation states, right? Well, the nation state now has a national curriculum. Okay, we have a bureaucracy. We have now a country within our parameter. We have a border now. We have all this. We have to build infrastructure within that border. We have to have a unified sort of teaching program, e.g., among other things, to reify and build up our concept of being a nation state, for example, whatever. And so we're going to have a national curriculum. And so, okay, well, then what do we teach about our religion, or the religion that's part of our heritage? Okay, we're going to teach X, Y, and Z. Boom, you've immediately got a new orthodoxy now. This thing that's just being enforced just everywhere, all across the society. See what I mean? Like before there was diversity, before it was whatever your local scholar, your local authority said. Now there's a giant stamp, there's a giant template that's being smashed down upon the whole society, not even necessarily consciously. It just happens by default, right? And suddenly there's a way in which Islam becomes this very single fixed official thing. Do you sort of see what I'm saying? Like there are all these ways in which just modern infrastructure has this effect. Does that make sense?
No, definitely. I almost sum it up as ignorance was bliss, or ignorance brought about ambiguity, and it was also way more blissful. Because I wonder if Muslims were arguing over the same differences that you see Muslims arguing about today. Because I've even heard from practicing Muslims that, I'm not sure if folding or praying with your hands to the side, how are you going to get in? How do you plan on getting into paradise praying like that?
Well, it's crazy. It does. Okay, so there's other things going on here. One thing is that in the pre-modern era, it just was not possible to enforce orthodoxy to the degree that it can now be enforced with modern technology and infrastructure. So there was just something pragmatic about like, look, we can't make everyone pray the same way, so we just won't. But now you can. Now it's way easier to actually, first of all, you have a modern state. Well, the state can actually, if you're able to influence the state will then like project your version on everyone and everything. State can actually enforce this sort of thing in a way that just wasn't true previously, right? It's like, what is that old miserable guy, Peter Hitchens? He says, I don't know why I listen to him. It's like guilty pleasure. I think he's like a maniac, but I enjoy listening to him. And so what does he say about Britain before the First World War? The average person's contact with the state pretty much amounted to the postman, right? Or the local constable. That's it. That was your interaction with the state. Sometimes you see the postman, you see the constable. Now you're constantly interacting with the state. See what I'm saying? Like now it's like, there's like police everywhere, and there's infrastructure everywhere, there's justice everywhere, there's bureaus everywhere. There's this like absolutely gigantic structure that actually can now, in much more detail, enforce, for example, religious orthodoxy if it, so chooses, right? So there's something, the diversity is, and not just that, obviously, of course, again, like all these YouTube videos, cassette tapes, recordings, standardized textbooks can all just be boosted everywhere around the world and have a far stronger influence now in enforcing one particular interpretation versus in the pre-modern period. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
there's something about, again, about all this sort of modern infrastructure that allows you to, you know what, the Bible was like this. All this we're describing, this happened with the printing press. Before the printing press, everyone had slightly different copies of the Bible, and that was that, and they just live with it. But now that you have a printing press, oh, now it's possible to have one single fixed, perfectly fixed version that you can mass disseminate everywhere. So now suddenly it becomes an issue. Which one do you have? Now the importance of the differences between the versions becomes like this huge, big issue that Christians continue to debate about, and so on and so forth. That only becomes possible through the technology. You see what I'm saying? It's like, anyway, I'm sorry, we've gone way off topic here.
I'm following. I find it to be very interesting. You know,
this happens with hadith, by the way, in a slightly less dramatic way. This happens when you have the rise of writing. In oral cultures, they don't have a concept really of a fixed original version, looser concept of what the sameness is. Like, if the story could be 50% different, hey, but the basic just is the same. It's the same. It's just identical. It's all the same. But once you have writing, it becomes possible to refer back to a fixed, specific template. And you can see, oh, these are really different. And so people then acquire a much more narrow concept of the correct original version versus deviations. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
that doesn't exist when you don't have the technology to make it clear. When you have the technology to make it clear, then people actually acquire, like, the perception changes. Like, it literally, the technology affects even how we think about these things, you know, moving us towards the idea of a fixed or proper true version, i.e. orthodoxy, etc. Sorry, go on, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say Michael McDonald said the same thing in our interview about how loose Arabic genealogy was before it became put in, once it became put in writing, then it was fixed. But before that, you would see all kind of additions, and he doesn't call them fabrications.